This morning, like every morning for the past 3 weeks, began with fire, not a dull ache, but a sharp, specific blaze that meant the nerves deep inside my spinal canal were awake and angry. I was standing, if you could call it that, gripping the parallel bars in the rehab gym of the Harmony Hills Community Center. The wood was slick with my own sweat. My physical therapist, Maya, watched me with that infuriatingly patient expression. Just to the end. Sloan. 3 more steps. 3 steps. It might as well have been a marathon. I lifted my right foot. The signal from my brain felt slow, as if traveling through wet cement. The foot dragged, the toe catching on the mat. A white-hot spike of electricity shot from the base of my spine down my hamstring and exploded behind my kneecap. I hissed, my knuckles turning white on the bars. "I know," Maya said softly. "The L5 nerve root is compressed. It's just inflammation from the procedure." My sister Leah, the brilliant HOA president of Harmony Hills, would later call it a minor modification request. This was my 6th. 6 spinal fusions in 3 years. A cascading series of complications that started with one bad disc and became a structural collapse. The incision ran 12 inches, a pale, puckered line from my mid-back down to the swell of my hip. Beneath it, 2 titanium rods and 16 screws were trying to force my vertebrae into an alignment they no longer recognized. I could feel the cold weight of the hardware, a constant alien pressure against my own bone. When I finished the agonizing walk, I collapsed onto the padded bench, my entire body vibrating. Maya handed me a bottle of water. That was when I saw the envelope on top of my bag. It was thick, creamy cardstock, embossed. The return address was for the Mid-States HOA conference. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. I tore the seal anyway. The Bayshore Convention Center. Harbor View this weekend. I read aloud, my voice flat. Maya frowned, handing me an ice pack. "You're not going," I continued, ignoring her. Keynote speaker, President Leah King, Judgment and Mercy, the courage to deny unnecessary home modifications. A laugh escaped me, dry and bitter. It hurt my incision. The courage. My little sister, the golden child, the star HOA enforcer of Harmony Hills, was going to lecture 300 of her fellow board members and residents on the courage to say no. The irony was thick enough to choke on. Our family operates on a simple binary. There is Leah, and then there is everyone else. Our parents, both mild-mannered retirees right here in Harmony Hills, speak of her with hushed reverence. She doesn't just enforce rules. She performs miracles of community standards. She doesn't just have a position. She has a calling. I used to have a calling too. I was an associate at one of the top litigation firms in the state, the one who argued cases against overreaching HOAs. I billed 700 hours of overtime, on track for partner before 35. Then my back gave out. The first surgery was supposed to be simple, but it failed. And the second. My calling now consisted of remote legal consulting from a modified recliner in my home office, trying to ignore the constant sizzling pain. In my parents' eyes, I had dropped out. I had failed to overcome. Leah had a different diagnosis. She delivered it over Christmas dinner 2 years ago after my 3rd surgery. "You know, Sloan," she'd said loud enough for our parents to hear, "at some point you have to look at the psychological component. You're demanding these modifications for attention. It's a classic entitlement addiction." My father had nodded gravely. "Leah has a point, dear. You must try to be stronger." I sat there, my spine feeling like a bag of broken glass, and just stared at her. The same sister who had cried for a week when she got a parking ticket for her lawn being 0.2 inches too long. The same sister who I now knew had a reputation. Because here is the secret I keep. My remote legal consulting is not for some drab corporation. I am senior counsel for the State Board of HOA Oversight. It is a quiet job. We don't advertise. when a resident feels unheard, when a neighbor sees a troubling pattern of fines, when a board member suspects the president is impaired by power, they call us. We are the ones who investigate. We are the ones who convene the panels, who review the minutes, who decide if a person is safe to serve on the board. The moment the first complaint against President Leah King hit our system 18 months ago, I walked into my supervisor's office and filed a formal recusal. She is my sister, I said. I cannot be in the same room as this file. My recusal was absolute. I have never seen the official documents. I have never accessed the investigation, but I am not deaf. I work in an office of 20 people who specialize in HOA legal review. I know the broad strokes. I know there are multiple complaints. I know the pattern they allege because it is the same one I heard in my own living room. A resident presents with a legitimate need for home modification after surgery. Leah dismisses it. It's in your head. You just need to work harder to comply with the rules. The resident begs for review, for a variance. Leah refuses. We don't grant exceptions based on anxiety. And when the resident weeks or months later finally gets another board member to approve, it shows the damage that has become permanent because the modification was denied too long. My work phone sitting on the bench beside me vibrated. It was a calendar notification, an automated one sent by the board's scheduling clerk. Subject: Emergency hearing in the matter of Leah King, HOA President. Date: Monday. Time: 9 a.m. Location: State Board of HOA Oversight. Hearing Room 3. The conference was this weekend. The emergency hearing to discuss the immediate temporary suspension of her position was the very next day. Leah was going to stand on a stage in front of 300 neighbors and lecture them on denying modifications, all while a state board was convening an emergency session because she had allegedly denied the basic variances that could have saved residents from catastrophic fines and home damage. Sloan. Maya's voice was sharp. I looked up. You have that look. The one you get before you're about to argue with me and then do something stupid. I'm going to the conference, I said. Absolutely not. You are 3 weeks post-op from a 2-level fusion. The incision is not fully closed. Sitting in a rigid convention center chair for even an hour could cause dehiscence. It could inflame the nerve roots to the point where this entire recovery is set back months. She's my sister. All the more reason to stay home, Maya said, her voice softening. Let your office handle it. This is not your fight. She was wrong. It was, in the most painful way possible, entirely my fight. This wasn't about the board. I was recused. My professional ethics were a firewall, absolute and non-negotiable. This wasn't about my parents or the years of being the family disappointment. This was about the truth. Leah was about to perform. She was going to use her charisma, her unearned confidence, and the power of her title to craft a narrative where residents like me, residents she had allegedly harmed, were the problem. We were weak. We were entitled. We were unnecessary. Her hearing on Monday would be closed. It would be a quiet procedural affair. But the conference was public. It was her stage. I need to hear it, I said, my voice low. I started the slow, painful process of strapping on the hard plastic back brace, the one that felt like a medieval corset. I need to hear what she says. I need to see her face when she lies. I looked up at Maya, my own eyes feeling as cold as the titanium in my spine. I need to see how my sister talks about residents in front of 300 people. Maya was wrong. This was not a stupid decision. It was a necessary one. I spent the next 48 hours in my modified recliner, the one that allowed me to work with my spine at a 130-degree angle. The only way to manage the pain was to obey the cold, hard logic of physics. But my mind was at the board of HOA oversight. I have a specific level of security clearance. While I am fully recused from case file 22A491, the one with Leah's name on it, I am not barred from viewing the general anonymized intradepartmental dashboard. It is part of my job to track trends, to see if one HOA is suddenly generating a spike in violation fines or if one board has an unusual rate of denied variances. So I looked. I filtered the database. Harmony Hills HOA, post-modification complaints, last 18 months. The pattern emerged from the statistical noise, stark and undeniable. I clicked through half a dozen anonymized summaries and the narrative was identical. Resident 449B reports escalating structural issues after denied ramp request, 6 weeks post-surgery. Board President note: resident exhibits anxiety. Focus on rule compliance. Reiterate PT for mental toughness. Resident 512G presents at 9 weeks, unable to navigate stairs without assistance. Board President note: delayed recovery. Psychological component likely. No indication for variance. Resident 330D reports sudden acute need for wider doorways at 5 weeks. Board President note: suspect noncompliance. Increase self-reliance exercises. Follow up in 1 month. The pattern was not just the denial. It was the immediate pivot to psychology, the refusal to grant variance. These were not charts from Leia's specific case file. Those were locked away from me, but they were part of the general data set, and the methodology was chillingly familiar. Then I saw a new entry flagged for supplemental evidence. It was designated Resident Helix. This one was different. The anonymous complainant had uploaded their own documents routed through a secure portal. The summary was cold. Resident reported progressive loss of mobility in left leg for 10 weeks. Board President refused request for variance citing addiction to modifications. Resident sought second opinion from State Board. I clicked the attachment. It was a structural report from a different inspector. The findings: advanced non-compliance risk at entryway. Significant barrier migration with impingement on accessibility. Evidence of chronic safety issues. Variance required. Non-compliance. Failed denial. The very thing a variance review is designed to prevent. The very thing that, if left for 10 weeks, can lead to the kind of permanent mobility damage that ends independence and confines people to walkers. 10 weeks. My corporate email, the one tied to the board, chimed. It was not an alert from the dashboard. The sender was an encrypted anonymous address. The subject line was blank. The body of the email was also blank. There was only one attachment. It was not a document. It was a text file containing a single line of metadata. A long string of letters and numbers, SHA 256 hash followed by a timestamp. I stared at it. This was not a normal complaint. This was from someone in IT. Someone who knew forensic data integrity. A hash is a digital fingerprint. You run a file through an algorithm and it produces this unique code. If even one comma in that file is changed, the hash becomes completely different. This string of characters meant nothing by itself, but the timestamp was from 3 nights ago at 2:15 in the morning. This was a message. It was telling me that a specific version of a file existed at that exact time. The sender was implying that the file as it exists now would not match this fingerprint. But more importantly, it suggested the existence of an immutable backup. Most HOA systems have 2 kinds of records. The live electronic violation log, or EVL, which board members can edit and amend, and then hidden deep in the servers is the backup, the immutable write once read many worm copy. This copy is the system's legal defense. It is the version that cannot be altered, cannot be overwritten. It is the digital truth serum. This hash was the key. On a physical notepad, I never put this kind of speculation into a digital system. I wrote 2 things. 1. Check EVL audit trail. 2. Verify digital signature chain. The audit trail is the EVL's internal memory. It logs every single click. It shows who opened the file, what they looked at, what they typed, and what they deleted. The signature chain shows who electronically signed that note. and when. This anonymous email was not an accusation. It was a map. It was telling the board, and by extension me, where to dig. It was telling us the resident files had been changed. Just as I was processing this, my personal cell phone buzzed on the desk. It was the family group chat. My mother had shared a link. It was a promotional post from Harmony Hills HOA's public relations team. A professionally shot photo of Leah, arms crossed, looking confident and compassionate in her pristine HOA blazer. The text beneath it was a teaser for her keynote speech. This weekend, join President Leah King as she discusses one of the hardest parts of modern HOA governance, the courage to say no to unnecessary home modifications. My father commented first. So proud of you, Leah. Someone finally has the guts to talk about it. My aunt, just brilliant. Your sister should take notes. I closed the app. My breath hitched, a sharp stabbing pain erupting under my ribs as the muscles spasmed. I focused on the rehab breathing Maya had taught me. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. The narrative. She was already spinning the narrative. She was painting a world where residents demand modifications. And brave board presidents like her must stand guard against our weakness. I thought back to the 8 months before my first surgery. 8 months of failed conservative care. I did the physical therapy until my muscles tore. I had 3 rounds of epidural steroid injections that did nothing. I tried everything. I did not demand modifications. I consented to them, exhausted and desperate, only after every other option had failed. She knew that. She was there. She told me I was giving in too easily. My phone chimed again. Maya, just checking in. Are you foam rolling? I texted back. Yes. Can you bring the extra lumbar cushion to my apartment tomorrow morning and the heavy-duty sacral brace? The hard plastic one. A pause. Sloan. No. Just bring them. Maya, I am going. This will set you back. Sitting upright in a convention chair will compromise the incision. You know what that means? More inflammation, more scar tissue, more pain. I know it is not worth it. I did not reply. I locked my phone and looked back at the hash code on my monitor. This was the crossroads. As a lawyer for the Board of HOA Oversight, my duty was absolute. I could not under any circumstances use my position or my access to pursue a personal vendetta. I had recused myself from her case. I could not investigate her. I could not see her files. I could not be the source of any evidence against her. My ethics had to be pristine. To do otherwise would not only cost me my license, it would invalidate any finding against her. This was not and could not be revenge. But I was also a sister. I was a resident. And I was now, as of this weekend, a character in her keynote speech. She was going to use me, my minor surgeries, my addiction, as a cautionary tale in front of 300 neighbors. She was going to publicly malign me to advance her own position, the same position she built, allegedly by maligning other residents in private. My recusal kept me from acting as a lawyer. It did not stop me from existing as a fact. I was not going to that conference as counsel for the board. I was not going to yell or to object or to confront her. I was going as a member of the public. I was going as a 34-year-old woman with a spine full of titanium. I was going to sit in that audience with my brace and my cushion. And I was going to listen. I was going to be a witness. And as I looked at that long string of numbers and letters, the hanging question echoed in the quiet of my office. What file does that hash match? Because if that fingerprint matched an original unaltered resident file and the live file in Harmony Hill system now produced a different hash, that would mean someone somewhere between that 2:15 a.m. timestamp and now had actively, deliberately, and fraudulently altered a legal HOA record. And the only question left would be who and when. The Bayshore Convention Center smelled of industrial-grade carpet cleaner and stale coffee. The main auditorium was vast. a cavern of tiered seating sloping down to a brightly lit stage. The air conditioning was set to morgue-like temperatures, a deliberate choice to keep 300 residents in polo shirts awake. It was a nightmare for me. Maya had forced me to take a wheelchair through the lobby. Non-negotiable. Sloan. Or I'm driving you home. But I had insisted on walking the final aisle to my seat. I chose the very back row near the exit. An aisle seat. Every step was a calculation. Brace tight. Core engaged. Lift. Shift. Plant. The hard plastic of my shell dug into my hips. The pain, a low, constant thrum of static, was manageable for now. I sat down, and the seat was exactly as unforgiving as Maya had predicted. It was a rigid plastic scoop with a thin layer of fabric. Even with the thick gel cushion Maya had provided, I could feel the pressure begin to build at the base of my spine right over the new incision site. I discreetly slid a small flat ice pack from my bag and wedged it between my back and the chair. The cold was a welcome, sharp distraction. The room was full. It was a sea of khaki pants, HOA polo shirts, and the occasional flash of expensive HOA jewelry. On the enormous LED screen above the stage, optimized violation graphs pulsed in cool blues and whites, data, clean, impersonal, definitive data. A polite ripple of applause began as the conference moderator, a man with a booming voice, walked to the podium. And now, he announced, it is my distinct privilege to introduce a true rising star in the HOA governance field, a graduate of community leadership programs, president of the prestigious Harmony Hills HOA, and a voice of innovative caution in our field. Please welcome President Leah King. The applause swelled. I watched the side of the stage. Leah emerged. She did not just walk. She made an entrance. Her HOA blazer was not just clean. It was impeccably starched without a single crease. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant knot. She smiled, a bright, confident flash of white, and the entire 300-person audience seemed to lean forward, captured. They trusted her instantly. She adjusted the microphone, the small sound echoing in the silence. Thank you, she said. Her voice was just like I remembered, not loud, but clear and sharp with a resonance that cut through the air and demanded to be heard. Thank you for that generous introduction. She clicked a remote, and the screen behind her changed. The title, Judgment and Mercy, the courage to deny unnecessary home modifications. My ice pack was already starting to melt. We live in an age of miracles. Leah began, pacing slowly, her heels making a soft, authoritative click on the stage. We can enforce standards. We can maintain property values. We can protect the community aesthetic. Our technology has become so advanced that we as board presidents are limited less by what we can do and more by what we should do. She was good. Her cadence was perfect. She sounded reasonable, compassionate, and wise. The hardest conversation we have, she continued, is not explaining a complex rule. It is explaining why we will not be granting one. It is telling a resident who is in pain. No, a slide appeared. It was a list of bullet points: resource stewardship, resident expectation versus community reality, the psychological component of rule noncompliance. We are seeing a trend, she said, her voice lowering, becoming more serious. A trend of residents who see modifications not as a last resort, but as a first option. Residents who demand intervention and our mercy. Our compassion must be balanced with our judgment. The judgment to know when the variance is not the answer. I shifted. A sharp needle-like pain shot down my left leg. I pressed my foot hard against the carpeted floor, trying to ground the sensation. Leah clicked to the next slide. It was titled Case Study, The Demanding Resident. It was anonymized, just a list of statistics. Resident X, 34 years old, history of back pain. My age, my history. Resident demands aggressive intervention despite minimal findings on initial inspection. A lie. My inspection had shown severe accessibility issues. Resident undergoes modification. Reports immediate dissatisfaction. Demands revision. I had reported a new different pain, a sign of a complication. I have seen this in my own practice, Leah said, turning to the audience. Her expression one of deep professional concern. But I have also unfortunately seen it in my own family. The air left my lungs. The static pain in my back flared into a roar. I have a family member, she said, her voice now laced with a subtle personal sadness. A brilliant woman in her own right, but she has fallen into this trap. She is trapped in a cycle of pain, psychology, and modification intervention. She has had 6 spinal surgeries. She let the number hang in the air. 6. I scanned the first 3 rows. I saw residents, neighbors of hers, nodding slowly, grave expressions. They were buying every word. And then I saw them. Front row, center, my parents. My mother was watching Leah, her hands clasped, her eyes shining with pride. My father was nodding just like the residents, his face set in agreement. He looked proud. Proud of the daughter on stage, the one brave enough to tell the truth. He did not look for me in the back row. They had not even known I was coming. They were completely, utterly captivated by the performance. Leah continued, 6 surgeries, despite multiple recommendations for conservative care. A refusal to truly engage in the hard work of physical therapy. A constant search for a modification fix to what has become a complex psychosocial problem. It's a lie, I whispered, the words barely audible. The 8 months of failed PT, the injections, the agony. This is not a failure of the rules, Leah said, her voice rising, finding its keynote crescendo. It is a failure of judgment. A failure to stop the cycle. And in this case, a case involving 6 minor procedures. That word minor. It hit me like a physical blow. A brutal violent spasm clenched the entire length of my back. The muscles around the new fusion site seized, squeezing the titanium rods, squeezing the inflamed nerves. The pain was white hot. I gasped, my hand flying to my back brace, digging my fingers into the hard plastic as if I could somehow reach through it and stop the fire. My 12-hour fusion, the one that had me in the intensive care unit for 2 days, the one I was still bleeding from, was minor. We must have the courage, Leah declared, to cut this cycle, to break the addiction to the variance. A smattering of applause broke out. Several people stood up. My parents were both standing, clapping enthusiastically. I had to stand. It was not a protest. It was not an interruption. It was a physical necessity. The chair was now an instrument of torture. The pressure on my spine was unbearable. Slowly using the seat in front of me for leverage, I pushed myself up. The movement was agonizing. A wave of dizziness and nausea washed over me as the pain spiked, sharp and blinding. I gripped the seat back, my knuckles white. I breathed in for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. My movement, a single person standing in the back row, was conspicuous. The applause died down. The people in the rows ahead of me turned. Even my parents 200 feet away turned, their expressions confused. Leah paused. She saw me. Her eyes widened just for a fraction of a second before her professional mask snapped back into place. She thought I was going to shout. She thought I was going to make a scene. I did not. I could not. I just stood there breathing through the pain, supported by a cage of plastic and 16 screws. I did not look at her. I did not look at my parents. I looked at the giant screen behind her. I stared at the title of her presentation. Glowing and cool, clean letters, judgment, mercy. I was the judgment. She was the one who had shown no mercy. A full heavy second passed. The The silence in the room was absolute. And then a new movement from the wings of the stage near the technical booth. A man stepped out of the shadows. He was not a technician. He was tall in a sharply tailored gray suit with silvering hair at the temples. He moved with an unhurried, profound authority. I knew him. My heart, which had been pounding with pain, suddenly went cold with a different kind of adrenaline. It was Dr. Rafael Mendez, the chairman of the State Board of HOA Oversight, the man who would be presiding over Leia's emergency hearing on Monday morning. He did not walk to the podium. He walked to the small set of stairs at the edge of the stage, took a floor microphone from a stand, and clicked it on. The small pop of the activation made Leia flinch. The mood in the room did not just change. It shattered. The air turned from academic appreciation to ice-cold dread. "President King," Mendez said. His voice was polite, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of a gavel. "A point of clarification, if I may, regarding your last case study." Leia stared at him, her confidence vanishing, replaced by a pale, tight confusion. "I'm sorry," she said. "Who are you?" "Dr. Rafael Mendez." He did not offer his title. He did not need to. The residents in the front rows knew exactly who he was. I saw a man in the second row visibly pale. "You spoke," Mendez continued, his voice perfectly level, "of a resident in your family. The one with 6 surgeries. Leia nodded, her eyes narrowing. "I was making a point about clinical judgment." "I understand," Mendez said. "My question is simple. Before forming that judgment, the one you just shared with 300 of your neighbors, President, did you ever review that resident's diagnostic imaging? Did you look at the MRIs, the CT scans, the post-operative reports?" Leia's smile was a thin, brittle line. She gripped the lectern, her knuckles white. 6 major surgeries in 3 years is clinically excessive," she repeated, her voice tightening, losing its melodic cadence and gaining a sharp defensive edge. "Any board president in this room," she said, gesturing broadly to the audience, "would find that pattern alarming." A few heads in the front row, neighbors from Harmony Hills, nodded in cautious agreement. "No one sees a pattern, President, without the evidence," Dr. Mendez replied. His voice was not loud, but it silenced the faint whispers. It was the voice of a man who did not need to raise his. "We do not form judgments from a keynote stage. We form them by reviewing the magnetic resonance imaging, the computed tomography scans, the surgical reports, the documented sequential history of complications." Leia's eyes darted to the conference moderator who looked paralyzed. Then back to Mendez. "That is private resident information, sir. I was speaking about a general anonymized case study." "You were not," Mendez said, the words landing like small cold stones. "You identified the resident as a member of your family, and you gave the precise correct number of her surgeries. You did so to bolster your own credibility, and you did so by your own admission, without having reviewed the diagnostic films that necessitated those procedures." The trap was sprung. The ethical violation was not just her alleged negligence. It was her public breach of my privacy to score a rhetorical point. I had to remain standing. The pain was a column of fire and the brace was the only thing holding me vertical. I did not look at my parents. I could feel their horror radiating from the front row, a different kind of heat. "Sir," my voice was a dry rasp, cracked. I swallowed, the motion agonizingly slow, and tried again. I spoke to the moderator, the man frozen by the podium. "Sir, my name is Sloan King. I am the family member, the resident Dr. King referred to." A sound rippled through the auditorium, a collective, sharp intake of breath. This was no longer a lecture. It was a confrontation. In the front row, my mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father looked as if he had been struck. As the resident in question, I continued, my voice gaining a thin steel edge. I am exercising my right to authorize the release of my medical history to this body. A man in a dark blue suit, whom I recognized as the conference's in-house counsel, immediately began moving toward me from the side aisle. I had prepared for this. I had contacted the organizer's legal team the moment I registered, flagging a potential conflict of interest regarding the keynote. I provided my identification and a signed notarized waiver to be held in escrow. I had hoped I would not need it. The lawyer met me at the end of the row. I did not hand him a document. I just nodded. The authorization is with you. File 7B. He nodded once, turned, and walked swiftly down the main aisle. He handed a single folded paper not to Leah, but directly to Dr. Mendez. The counsel stepped to a floor microphone. This is a signed verified HIPAA waiver from Ms. Sloan King, he announced to the silent room. It authorizes Dr. Rafael Mendez to read specific objective findings from her medical record into this proceeding in light of the public identifying statements just made by the keynote speaker. Leah stared, her face ashen. Sloan, you cannot do this. This is family. It stopped being family. Leah, I said, my voice carrying in the heavy silence. When you called my fusion a minor surgery, Mendez put on a pair of slim silver-framed reading glasses. He unfolded the paper. He was not reading my emotional history. He was reading the cold, hard, objective facts, the timeline I had memorized through years of pain. Let us correct the record for the audience, Mendez said, addressing the 300 residents, not my sister. Prior to the first surgery, the resident, Ms. King, underwent 8 months of documented failed conservative care. This included structured physical therapy twice weekly, 3 separate rounds of lumbar epidural steroid injections, and maximum dosage trials of gabapentin, all failed to provide relief. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the LED screen behind Leah's head. The initial procedure, a microdiscectomy, was complicated by a dural tear. He continued, his tone flat. Academic, a known risk. The revision surgery, surgery number 2, became necessary 9 weeks later due to a catastrophic non-union, a pseudoarthrosis at the L5S1 level, confirmed by CT scan. He looked up over the top of his glasses and his gaze swept the residents in the front rows. Surgery number 3 was an extension of the fusion to L4 required due to documented adjacent segment disease, a direct structural consequence of the first 2 procedures. Surgery 4 was a hardware revision. Surgery 5, a decompression. Surgery 6, the one from which Ms. King is currently recovering, was a posterior lumbar interbody fusion from L3 to S1. He folded the paper. These were not 6 minor procedures. They were not elective. They were a cascading series of documented required structural failures, each one confirmed by radiology. The silence that followed was heavy, cold, and judgmental. The residents who had been nodding along with Leah's narrative of a demanding resident now stared at her, their expressions hardening. They were homeowners. They understood the data. And they had just been profoundly, professionally misled. Leah was shaking her head, her hands splayed on the lectern as if to hold herself up. This is a complete mischaracterization, she insisted, her voice high and strained. You are taking technical notes out of context. My clinical experience. My judgment tells me this was a behavioral cycle. The files don't show the whole picture. Your clinical experience, Mendez said, and his voice lost every trace of academic politeness, is not a substitute for the radiological evidence. Which brings us to the present. The shift in the room was seismic. President King, Mendez said, are you aware that an emergency hearing regarding your position as HOA president is scheduled for this Monday morning at 9 o'clock? A wave of shocked murmurs erupted. This was no longer a breach of ethics. This was a public unsealing of a state-level investigation. Leah recoiled. That is a confidential board matter. You have no right. It was a confidential matter, Mendez countered, his voice like ice. It was confidential until precisely 10 minutes ago when you chose this stage to publicly defame and misrepresent the resident whose case is central to that hearing. You opened this door, President. Not me. The conference moderator finally jolted into action. He rushed to the main podium, his face pale with panic. Dr. Mendez, this is highly irregular. This is a keynote address, not a deposition. I must insist that we take a break. No, Mendez said. The single word cut off the moderator completely. We will not. This body, this conference of your peers, just listen to a board president use this respected platform to spread dangerous governance misinformation. This narrative, this branding of a complex resident as a psychological case to avoid a difficult decision, is not just an academic failing. It is a profound public safety risk. He turned his gaze back to Leah, who looked trapped in the glare of the stage lights. And it is a pattern. The blood drained from her face. The Board of HOA Oversight, Mendez continued, is in receipt of 5 additional resident complaints against you, President King, all alleging a similar fact pattern, all alleging escalating post-modification issues, all alleging your categorical refusal to grant appropriate variances, all alleging you assigned their documented physical needs to a psychological component, all resulting in documented severe and, in 2 cases, permanent mobility complications. This was it. The connection, the nexus of her private negligence and her public arrogance, laid bare for the entire neighborhood to see. I did not move. I did not speak. The pain in my back was so intense it was making my vision swim at the edges, the stage lights blurring into halos. I just stood straight as the rods in my spine would allow, held together by my brace and by a cold, quiet fury. I kept my eyes fixed on the bright white spotlight just above Leah's head. I would not give her my anger. I would not give her my tears. I would only be the fact she could not dismiss. I was the living audit trail. In the 3rd row, a woman I hadn't noticed before, holding a press pass for a major neighborhood newsletter, was not just taking notes. Her smartphone was propped up on her lap, its camera light glowing red. She was live-streaming the entire thing. Her fingers were flying across a small tablet. The story had just changed in real time. The title running beneath the live video feed being broadcast to the neighborhood was no longer President King discusses governance judgment. A new cheerin was running across the bottom of the screen. I saw my name. I saw Leah's. And I saw the words emergency hearing. The resident files were finally, irrevocably, open. The auditorium was a vacuum. The shock of Dr. Mendez's words had sucked all the air out of the room. The 300 residents sat in stunned, absolute silence. Leah was frozen, her face a mask of white plaster, her eyes fixed on Mendez. The moderator, who had tried to intervene, was now backing slowly toward the wings, abandoning the stage entirely. I remained standing in the back row. The pain was a living thing, a solid column of white-hot cement that had replaced my spine. My brace was the only thing holding me upright. I focused on my breathing, the 4-4-6 count Maya had taught me, turning my entire consciousness into a tiny controlled box that could exist inside the hurricane of my own physical agony. From the technical row just in front of me, a man turned his head. He was not a resident. He wore a black polo shirt with a small conference logo and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked like an IT systems engineer. He caught my eye. He gave a single small nod as if confirming something I already knew. Then he mouthed 4 words slowly and clearly just for me. Audit trail tells all. The words landed in my brain with the force of a gavel. The audit trail. I thought instantly of the anonymous email. The one with no body, no subject, just that long complex string of characters. The hash. It was not just a file hash. I realized it now, standing in the cold auditorium. It was almost certainly a Merkle hash. It was not the fingerprint of a single document. It was the fingerprint of an entire block of documents. It was the digital seal on a batch of server logs captured at a specific moment in time. The 2:15 a.m. timestamp. It was the incorruptible, immutable backup on the stage. Dr. Mendez was no longer addressing my sister. He had become a professor and the auditorium was his lecture hall. He turned to the technician in the booth who had been running Leia's slides. "Young man," Mendez said, his voice calm and projective. "This conference is sponsored by several electronic records vendors. Is it not?" The technician, a young man in a headset, stepped nervously into the light. Yes, sir. Our primary sponsor. Their demo package is installed on this system." "Excellent," Mendez said. "Put it on the main screen." Leia finally found her voice, though it was high and brittle. "What? This is absurd. This is not a courtroom. You cannot simply take over my presentation." "I am not taking it over, President King," Mendez said, his voice flat and cold. "Your presentation is finished. This is now a public safety demonstration. I want to illustrate a concept for this neighborhood body. The concept of digital permanence. Sir, the EMR demo." "Now." Leia's face contorted. But she was silent. She was trapped. Her meticulously crafted slides, the graphs, the bullet points, the title Judgment Mercy, vanished from the enormous LED screen. They were replaced by the sterile blue and white interface of a generic EVL dashboard. A fake resident named Doe John was displayed in the corner. The technician, visibly sweating, stepped forward with a microphone. "This is the standard public-facing demonstration package," he stammered. "All the data is fictional." "We are aware," Mendez said. "We are here to discuss a principle, not a specific resident. Please explain to the room the function of an EVL audit trail." The technician swallowed. "Well, the EVL, it's built on a database architecture. The primary rule is immutability. You can't actually delete anything. Even if you hit delete, the data is just flagged, hidden. It's never gone. The system is designed to protect the integrity of the record for legal and governance continuity. Every single action, every click, every view, every keystroke is logged." "Show us," Mendez commanded. The technician's hands flew across the keyboard. "Okay, so I hear in Mr. Doe's chart at 10:03 a.m. A board president L. King orders a variance for accessibility ramp." He highlighted the line on the screen for all 300 people to see. "Order variance, accessibility ramp, a standard post-modification order," Mendez narrated, and then the technician clicked again. Then at 10:05 a.m., just 2 minutes later, the order is canceled. The line on the screen now read, "Status. Cancelled. User override." "By whom?" Mendez asked, the question sharp as a scalpel. "To see that you have to view the audit log," the technician said. He right-clicked the entry. A menu appeared. He clicked View Audit History. A new window populated the screen. It was a simple Stark spreadsheet. It was a timeline of the data's life. Time 10 hours 3 minutes and 14 seconds. Action, order create. Variance, accessibility ramp. User L. King, President. Time 10 hours 5 minutes and 22 seconds. Action, order delete. Variance, accessibility ramp. User L. King, President. Admin. A sound. A low horrified wave of understanding passed through the crowd. It was not a gasp of shock. It was a murmur of recognition. The user ID, L. King, President. Leia lunged toward the microphone. "That is not me. That is a simulation. It's a fake name. It's a setup. This is liable. Proves nothing. Of course it's a simulation," Dr. Mendez said, his voice smooth as ice. We have already established that it is a coincidence of programming, a placeholder if you will, but it is a powerful one. He turned back to the audience, his gaze sweeping the residence. It is here to demonstrate the mechanism, to show these 300 homeowners that every action, every change, and every deletion leaves a permanent timestamped, user-specific signature. The data always remembers. The audit trail tells all. My hand was shaking. The pain in my back was so sharp it was making my vision blur at the edges, the stage lights fracturing into needles. But I held my ground. This was the how. This was the digital tool. I raised my phone, bracing my elbow against the hard plastic of my shell, and focused the lens. The image was perfectly clear, the giant screen, the order delete entry, and the user ID that matched my sister's. It was a public demonstration. I was free to photograph it. I was documenting the pattern. As I lowered my phone, it buzzed in my hand. Not a call, not a text, an email. My screen glowed. It was the same encrypted anonymous sender as before. The subject line was blank. The body of the email was one short chilling sentence. Check Helix at Harmony Hills. Not deleted, just overwritten. Backups don't forget. I read the words 3 times. The world tilted. The white-hot pain in my spine seemed to vanish, replaced by an Arctic intellectual clarity. Not deleted, just overwritten. Of course, deleting an order, as the demo just showed, is crude. It is loud. It leaves a massive obvious red flag in the audit trail. It is an act of digital vandalism. Leah was many things. She was not an amateur. Overwritten. It meant something far more insidious. It meant going back into a resident's chart days or even weeks after an appointment and using administrative privileges to amend the note. To change the history. A resident says, "My pain is a 9 out of 10 and my left foot is numb." The president charts it. A week later, that president or an administrator goes back into the file, clicks amend note. The new version, the one that now sits on top, reads, "Resident reports pain is a 4 out of 10. Reports occasional tingling. Condition improving. Continue physical therapy." The live chart, the one printed for a cursory review, the one sent to insurance, now shows a resident who is improving. It retroactively justifies the decision to refuse a variance. It paints the resident as anxious, unreliable, complainer. It is the most profound kind of lie. It gaslights the resident with their own HOA record. Backups don't forget. The immutable backup. The worm. Write once, read many copy. The snapshot of the server that was captured at 2:15 in the morning and sealed with that Merkle hash. That file would still have the original note. It would still say 9 out of 10. It would still say numb. My hook. The words that had been echoing in my mind suddenly became real. The resident files changed. They had not been erased. They had been rewritten. This was not just one president. This was too complex, too coordinated, too risky. This was not just arrogance. This was fraud. This was a conspiracy. Why? Why would she do it? Why would a star HOA president risk her entire position to falsify a chart? The answer clicked into place. Cold and sterile. Key performance indicators. She was being measured. She was being graded. This was not personal. This was policy. My gaze lifted from my phone. This was bigger than Leah. Mendez knew it. He was not just looking at Leah anymore. The demo was the how. Now he was hunting for the why. I scanned the audience, my eyes sweeping past my parents, who looked like 2 pale, shrunken ghosts in their front row seats. I scanned the expensive dark suits from Harmony Hills HOA, all clustered near the front, and I saw him. 5th row, aisle seat. Dr. Quinn Ainsley, the Director of Community Services for Harmony Hills, the man who hired Leah, the man who set the board's budgets, the man who determined raises and bonuses, The man who ran the entire neighborhood compliance operation. He was not looking at Leia, his collapsing protege. He was not looking at me. He was staring, unblinking, the Dr. Rafael Mendez. Ainsley was famous for his easy smile and his boardroom tan. He was not smiling now. His face was a sickly pale gray. His jaw was clenched so tightly that I could see the muscle bunch and knot in his cheek from the back of the auditorium. He was not just tense. He was terrified. The question in my mind shifted, clarified, and sharpened. It was no longer what did Leia do. It was who told her to do it. The answer was sitting in the 5th row. His face as tight as a guitar string, looking like a man who was watching his entire world burn to the ground. The demonstration ended. Dr. Mendez did not dismiss the crowd. He simply nodded to the technician, turned, and walked off the stage. No one else moved. The auditorium filled with 300 people was silent for a full 10 seconds. Then came the chaos. It was not applause. It was the sound of 300 chairs scraping, 300 voices erupting at once. Residents were standing, turning to each other, their faces a mixture of shock and professional fury. The woman in the 3rd row with the press pass was already on her phone, speaking in the rapid-fire, low voice of someone who has the scoop of a lifetime. On stage, Leia stood alone, bathed in the white light, the demo screen's generic L. King President user ID still glowing behind her like an accusation. She looked small, her HOA blazer suddenly looking 2 sizes too big. My own body, which had been running on pure Arctic adrenaline, registered the change first. The pain returned, not as a sharp spike, but as a crushing gravitational pull. The room swam. I had been standing for too long. Far too long. I gripped the back of the seat, my knuckles aching. I had to get out. I had to get horizontal. Sloan. I turned. My parents were there at the end of the aisle. They had not waited. They had run up the stairs, their faces pale and stricken. My mother reached for me, her hands fluttering, not quite daring to touch my brace. Sloan, how could you? Her voice was a broken whisper, tears welling. How could you do this to her in front of everyone? I did nothing, I said. My voice was a dry rasp. I authorized the release of my own file after she misrepresented it. My father pushed past my mother, his face a mask of cold fury I had not seen since I told him I was dropping my law partnership. You stood up. You brought that man Mendez here. You planned this. This was a deliberate, vicious attack on your own sister. He is the chairman of the board, I said, leaning heavily on the seatback. The carpeted floor seemed to be tilting. I did not bring him. Her hearing is on Monday. He was here to observe her. She chose to lie about me in public in front of him. You have to fix this, my mother pleaded, her hands finally gripping my arm. The pressure, slight as it was, sent a jolt of pain through me. I flinched, pulling away. Fix it. How? How do I fix this? Mom, talk to him. Talk to that Dr. Mendez. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. Tell him you were upset. Tell him she's a good president. She made a mistake. She's under pressure. Help your sister, Sloan. She will be ruined. Her whole life. Everything she worked for, it will be destroyed. Is that what you want? Her words, intended as a plea, landed like an indictment. The old familiar script. Help Leia. Protect Leia. Sloan, be the reasonable one. Sloan, be the soft one. Help her by what? I asked, the words feeling heavy and toxic on my tongue. Help her by lying. Help her by committing perjury. Help her by denying the truth. The same way she denies her residence. Blood is thicker than evidence. Sloan, my father snapped. The words were so sharp several people in the next aisle turned to look. Not at the board of HOA oversight, I shot back. my voice suddenly as cold and hard as his. It cannot be. The moment blood is thicker than evidence, the entire system fails. The moment a board president's family member can get them off a complaint, the public is not safe. I am senior counsel for that board. I built my career on that principle. I have a badge. That. It means something. Your badge should mean protecting your family. My badge means protecting everyone from family, I said. I recused myself the moment her name hit our system. I signed the papers and walled myself off. I have not seen one page of the official investigation. I did that to protect the integrity of the process. I did that to protect her from any claim of bias. I did that to be fair. This was not fair, my mother cried. She called my 12-hour fusion a minor surgery. The words ripped out of me louder than I intended. My back seized in a violent warning spasm. I gasped, pressing my hand flat against the plastic brace. She did it to 300 of her neighbors. She used my pain to build her brand. That is not fair. She is tough, my father said, his jaw set, falling back on the oldest defense in the King family playbook. She has always been tough. You were always so sensitive, and there it was, the root of it all. The diagnosis that had defined my entire life, delivered not by a doctor, but by my father. I remembered with sudden photographic clarity. Leah, age 12. She had fallen from her bicycle. A bad fall on gravel. Her knee was a bloody mess. Gravel embedded deep in the skin. She had stood up, tears in her eyes, and brushed the dirt off. I'm fine, she'd gritted out. My father had beamed. That's my tough girl. Nothing stops her. 2 years later, I was 14. I got my first true migraine. I was blind in one eye, nauseated, and trapped in a room of suffocating, silent darkness. My mother had opened the door, letting the hallway light spear my vision. You're so sensitive, Sloan. You have to learn to push through these things. Look at your sister. She never lets a little pain stop her. This was the training. This was the environment we were raised in. Leah was rewarded for denial. I was punished for admission. And now, 20 years later, that family dynamic had metastasized. Leah was a board president who instinctively denied the pain of others because in her world, toughness was the only valid response, and I was the resident, the sensitive one who had to fight a system of denial just to have my physical reality acknowledged. I am not sensitive, Dad, I said, my voice quiet, trembling with exhaustion and a lifetime of suppressed rage. I am in pain. There is a difference. I had to be honest with myself. Standing there in that chaotic hallway, had I been jealous of her? Yes. God, yes. I was jealous of her health. I was jealous of her spine. I was jealous of the way our parents looked at her, the easy pride they had in her calling, while I became the remote consulting shut-in. I was jealous of her impenetrable, infuriating confidence. But my jealousy did not alter the diagnostic films. My envy did not migrate a screw. My resentment did not overwrite a residence chart to say 4 out of 10 when the resident had said 9. My jealousy was an emotion. The audit trail was a fact, and I knew which one mattered on Monday. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was not a text. It was an encrypted email from the board's internal legal counsel. A push notification. Subject: Update. Hearing 22A4, 91 King L. Body counsel be advised. In light of public statements made by President King at the Mid-States HOA conference which identified and maligned a primary witness, the emergency hearing on Monday at 9 o'clock will be partially open to the press. Your testimony regarding your own resident file has been formally requested. The stakes had just risen. It was no longer a quiet internal affair. It would be public. My phone buzzed again, almost immediately. This time it was a text from Leah. You did this. You're ruining my life. You have to stop them. I stared at the words, the reflexive, childish plea. Stop them, as if I were the one in control, as if this was a sibling squabble and not a matter of state law. I did not reply. I locked the phone and slid it into my bag. The movement slow and deliberate. Sloan, a new voice, not family. Maya. She pushed through the crowd, her face a mask of professional concern. She was carrying a fresh ice pack, a bottle of water, and the lumbar cushion for my chair. She ignored my parents completely. Her eyes were on me. You're gray, she said. It was not an accusation. It was a clinical assessment. You have been upright for 55 minutes. We are leaving now. She did not wait for an answer. She put her hand on my arm. Not grabbing, just supporting, and began to guide me toward the exit. My parents parted, looking confused, their arguments dying on their lips as the stranger took charge of me. Sloan. My mother tried one last time. What are we going to do? I paused at the doorway, the cool air of the outer hall hitting my face. I looked back at them. They looked old and terrified. They had built their world around a single shining star and they had just watched it implode. I don't know what you are going to do, I said, my voice flat, devoid of anger, devoid of anything but exhaustion. But I am going to go lie down, and on Monday I am going to go to that hearing and I am going to answer the questions that I am asked. Honestly, Maya guided me into a quiet alcove, away from the flow of horrified residents. She helped me lower myself, brace and all, onto a padded bench. The relief of being off my feet was so profound it was almost nauseating. She handed me the water and the fresh ice pack. Breathe, she commanded softly. For in, hold, control the pain. Don't let it control you. I closed my eyes and did as she said. The rhythmic breathing began to push back the edges of the white-hot agony. I thought of Leia's text. I thought of my parents' faces. I thought of Dr. Quinn Ainsley, the HOA director. His face a mask of terror in the fifth row. The question was clear in my mind. Who benefited from this? From the overwritten files, the amended notes, the policy of denying variances. Was Leia a uniquely arrogant and cruel president? Or was she a soldier? Was she just a high-performing cog in a machine that rewarded toughness, that punished weakness, that prioritized metrics over residents, reduce post-modification variances by 20%, discharge complaints from review in under 48 hours, maintain a resident complaint score below 5%. I had seen those key performance indicators in other investigations. I knew how the system worked. Ainsley set the targets. Leia, his star president, met them. She met them by any means necessary. I opened my eyes. Maya was watching me. You're back, she said. I am, I said. I have to testify Monday morning. Then you will rest until then, she said. The data is not your job. Your job is to heal. It is my job, I said, the realization settling over me with a cold final weight. Not all of it, but my part. I would not go into that hearing as an angry sister. I would not go in as the family disappointment. I would not speak to her motives or her arrogance or our family's broken history. I would go in as Sloan King, senior counsel for the board, and as resident 7339. I will speak to my own file. I will state the facts I'm permitted to state. The rest, I thought, as I placed the ice pack over the burning incision site. The rest is for the data. The rest is for the audit trail. The air in the hallway was cold. The storm was no longer coming. It had arrived. Monday morning, 9 o'clock. Hearing room 3 was not the frozen vast auditorium of the conference. It was a small wood-paneled box, overheated and airless. It was designed for pressure. The only sound in the room was the heavy amplified thud of the second hand on a large plain wall clock. It felt less like a measure of time and more like a hammerfall. Dr. Rafael Mendez sat at the head of a heavy oak U-shaped table. He was flanked by the two other voting members of the emergency panel, Dr. Eris, a sharp older woman who ran the state university's governance ethics program, and Mr. Bellows, a public member, a retired accountant whose gaze missed nothing. At a separate, smaller table, a legal coordinator for the board managed a digital recorder and stacks of files. Leah sat at the opposing table. She was not the star in the white coat. In a severe gray dress she looked diminished, pale, and terribly young. Beside her sat Mr. Vance, the general counsel for Harmony Hills HOA. He was the opposite, immaculate in a pinstriped suit, emanating a calm, expensive confidence. He was not here to protect Leah. He was here to protect the association. I was not at the table. I was in a single chair against the sidewall in the designated witness area. My role was explicit. I was here as resident 7339, a witness to my own file. I was not Sloan King, senior counsel. My recusal was a wall of steel. I sat bolt upright, my gel cushion the only barrier against the hard wooden chair, the rigid plastic of my brace digging into my ribs. The ice pack I had strapped to my back before I left home was already beginning to melt. Mr. Vance, Mendez began, his voice devoid of the theater from Saturday. We are convened on an emergency basis to address 5 formal complaints and the public statements made by President King, which have compromised the confidentiality of this board's investigation. We will begin by reviewing the EVLs of the 5 complainants. Vance offered a thin professional smile. Of course, Mr. Chairman. Harmony Hills HOA is as always fully transparent. We have provided the board with complete certified printouts of all 5 resident charts in question. He gestured to 5 thick spiral-bound documents on the table. Mendez did not look at them. He nodded to his legal coordinator. Mr. Vance, the coordinator said, her voice clear and precise. These printouts appear to be the current history versions of the charts. They are the official certified records. They are, Mendez interjected, incomplete. A printout of the current file, as you know, only shows the last version of any amended note. It does not show the history of the alterations. It does not show what was overwritten. Vance steepled his fingers, affecting a look of strained patience. Mr. Chairman, retrieving the full forensic audit trail, the metadata, the user logs, that is an extraordinarily burdensome IT request. Our proprietary EVL software is not designed for that kind of rapid export. It would require significant manpower. We would of course be happy to cooperate, but we would need a continuance of at least 30 days to produce those logs. The stall, the classic legal delay tactic. The clock on the wall ticked. Thud. That will not be necessary, Mr. Vance, Mendez said, his voice flat. The board has already obtained the data. Vance's practiced smile did not falter, but his eyes went cold. The board calls its first witness, the legal coordinator announced. Ms. Tara Rowe, custodian of records for OmniCloud data storage. A woman in a sharp blue suit entered from the side door and was sworn in. Mr. Vance's composure fractured. He turned to look at her, his jaw tight. OmniCloud was Harmony Hills' own third-party infrastructure vendor. The legal coordinator began. Ms. Rowe, does your company maintain an immutable worm-compliant backup of all Harmony Hills data as required by state and federal law? We do, Ms. Rowe said, her voice clear. We take a complete snapshot of all EVL servers every 24 hours at precisely 2 a.m. Those snapshots are sealed, encrypted, and cannot be altered, accessed, or overwritten by the client. They are the legal immutable archive. Mr. Vance, Mendez cut in. Does Harmony Hills contest that OmniCloud is their data infrastructure partner? Vance's reply was clipped. We do not, Ms. Row. The coordinator continued. The board subpoenaed the snapshot relevant to the complaint of resident Helix, specifically the data block from 3 nights ago. We provided your office with a unique Merkle hash string this morning. Were you able to compare that hash to the sealed data block on your server? I was, Ms. Rowe said. It was a perfect bit-for-bit match. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was my hash, the anonymous email. The board's investigation had been running parallel to my own, and the anonymous source had sent the key to both of us. The data is verified, Mr. Chairman, the coordinator said. Mr. Vance, Mendez said. Your burdensome data has been produced. Let us proceed. A large monitor on a rolling cart was activated. The coordinator displayed 2 documents side by side in 2 neat columns. Column A was labeled Harmony Hills Current Record. Column B was labeled OmniCloud Immutable Backup. We refer to the complaint of resident Helix, the coordinator said, the file mentioned by the anonymous tip. In the current record provided by Mr. Vance, the resident note from October 10th reads, Resident reports mild discomfort. Approximately 4 out of 10. Seems anxious. Advised to continue PT. And the immutable backup, she continued, her finger tracing the line on the screen. The original note logged that same day reads, Resident reports severe radicular pain, 9 out of 10. New onset foot drop. Left side. Numbness in S1 distribution. Resident requesting variance. The air in the room became thick and hot. The evidence of the lie was stark, glowing in blue and white. Now let us look at the audit trail for this entry, Mendez said. The screen changed. It was a log file, a spreadsheet of digital actions. Time 10:15:2. Action. Note create. User L. King. President. This was the original 9 out of 10 note. Time 10 hours 17 minutes and 45 seconds. Action. Order create. Variance accessibility. User L. King. President. Here the coordinator pointed. President documents the severe symptoms and while appropriately orders the variance. She then highlighted 2 entries from several hours later. Time 14 hours 30 minutes and 11 seconds. Action. Order delete. User P. Jones. Admin. Time 14 hours 30 minutes and 40 seconds. Action. Note amend. User P. Jones. Admin. Vance sees the opening. As the record clearly shows, Mr. Chairman, the actions were taken by a community administrator P. Jones as admin, not by President King. The president cannot be held responsible for every clerical action. Please read the user-generated note attached to the deletion, the coordinator said. Mendez's voice dangerously quiet. The coordinator zoomed in. A small free text field was attached to the order delete entry. A note typed by the administrator. Note per President Leia K. Variance cancelled. Resident exhibits symptom magnification. Advised to increase PT. Will follow up in 4 weeks. Leia shot up from her chair, rattling the table. That is not fair. Her voice was high and cracking. That is standard protocol. We review all orders as a team. We are under intense pressure from administration to reduce unnecessary variances. That was a department decision, not just mine. I was just following procedure. A procedure, Mendez said, that directs a community administrator to cancel a necessary variance ordered by a president. A procedure that directs them to retroactively amend the resident's pain score from a 9 to a 4 and to document symptom magnification. It was a consensus. Leia insisted, tears of rage and panic in her eyes. The resident was fine. The resident, Mendez said, his eyes dropping to the file, developed progressive cauda equina syndrome. He underwent emergency surgery at another facility 2 weeks later. He has permanent bladder and bowel dysfunction and now requires a drop foot brace to walk. Is that fine, President King? Leah collapsed back into her chair as if her bones had dissolved. Vance put a hand on her arm, his face grim, silencing her. "You mentioned protocol," Mendez said, pivoting. "You mentioned pressure from administration. MS. Coordinator, call the next witness." The board calls Mr. David Reed. A man in a deeply conservative suit entered, was sworn in, and sat. "Mr. Reed," Mendez said, "please state your employer and your position for the record." "I am David Reed. I am a senior risk analyst for American Homeowners Mutual, the compliance insurance carrier for the Harmony Hills HOA Group." Vance went white. This was a catastrophic betrayal. This was the association's own insurance company, the one paid millions to defend them, testifying against them. "Mr. Reed," Mendez continued, "has your firm issued any official warnings or recommendations to the Harmony Hills HOA board in the last 12 months? Reed put on his glasses and read from a prepared statement. "Yes, we have issued 2 formal advisories. The first was 6 months ago. The second was 3 months ago regarding what a statistically anomalous rate of delayed post-modification complication reporting. Specifically," he continued, "we noted a clear pattern of refusing variance requests for residents who reported escalating mobility symptoms. This pattern, in our actuarial opinion, represented an unacceptable and catastrophic liability exposure." "You warned them," Mendez clarified. "You told them this protocol was dangerous, reckless, and would lead to indefensible lawsuits, and they did nothing." "The pattern," Mr. Reed said, "did not change." The room was silent. The clock ticked. Thud. The chain of evidence was complete. The files were altered. The alterations were directed by Leah. The motive was protocol. The protocol was so reckless the association's own insurance company had formally in writing warned them to stop. Leah was the bottleneck. She was the one giving the orders, amending the notes, but she was not the source of the pressure. She was the one executing the policy. Mendez looked at Leah, who was staring at her hands. He looked at Vance, who was staring at his legal pad. He had the how and the what. Now he was moving decisively to the why. He turned to the legal coordinator. "The board," Mendez said, his voice ringing in the small hot room, "calls Dr. Quinn Ainsley to the witness table." Dr. Quinn Ainsley was sworn in. He did not look like the terrified man from the auditorium. He was back in his element, the boardroom. He was composed, his suit immaculate, his expression one of polite professional concern. He sat at the witness table, adjusted the microphone, and looked at Dr. Mendez as an equal. "Dr. Ainsley," Mendez began, his voice a flat, neutral tone. "You have been present for the testimony regarding the complaints against President Leah King. You have heard her state that her actions were in accordance with a department protocol regarding post-modification variances. Are you familiar with such a protocol?" "I am," Ainsley said, his voice smooth and confident. "Though protocol is perhaps too strong a word. We issued a guideline, a best practice initiative." "For what purpose?" Mendez asked. "To reduce the clinical and financial burden of unnecessary, defensive, and frankly resident-demanded modifications," Ainsley said. He sounded like a man giving a keynote speech of his own. "We are stewards of a complex system. We identified a pattern of over-requesting. Our HOA board set an internal goal to reduce redundant post-modification variances by 20% year over year." "A laudable goal," Mendez said. "Did this guideline come from you?" "It was a collaborative effort. But yes, it had my final approval. I signed off on the email memo distributed to the board staff." The legal coordinator on cue displayed the email on the monitor. It was dated 11 months prior. It clearly stated the 20% reduction goal. And at the bottom, the digital signature was clear: Quinn Ainsley, Director, Community Services. A 20% reduction, Mendez repeated, letting the number hang in the air. Dr. Ainsley, where in this guideline memo is the exception for residents presenting with escalating post-modification mobility deficits? Where is the clause that instructs a president to bypass this goal if a resident reports new onset foot drop or a pain score of 9 out of 10? Ainsley's smile was slight. Mr. Chairman, we do not hire clerical staff. We hire presidents. We trust our world-class board leaders like President King, to exercise their clinical judgment. This was a guideline, not a mandate. It was never intended to replace a president's own assessment. The room was silent. He had just, in one clean corporate sentence, thrown Leah under the bus. He had framed the policy as a gentle suggestion, and her actions as a rogue, overly zealous interpretation. Leah, who had been sitting as still as a stone, shot her head up. Her eyes wide with disbelief flew to Ainsley. That is not true, she said, her voice cracking. That is not how it was. We had weekly compliance meetings. Our dashboards were color-coded, red if we were over the variance budget, green if we were under. I was just following orders. I was doing what I was told. Following orders, Mendez repeated, his gaze shifting to my sister. Leah was crumbling. This was not the arrogant star. This was the straight-A student who had just been given an F. He told us to be team players. He said it was about resource stewardship. I was just trying to meet the department's goals. I felt the brace digging into my skin. This was the moment. I raised my hand just slightly. Mr. Chairman. Mendez looked at me. Vance, the HOA lawyer, tensed. Ms. King, Mendez said, acknowledging me. You are here as a witness, not as counsel. I understand, sir, I said, my voice quiet but clear in the small room. But as the witness whose case was publicly misrepresented by President King, I request permission to ask her one single clarifying question about the standard of care she has just described. Vance started to rise. I object. Overruled, Mendez snapped. Ms. King's question will be limited to the subject of clinical judgment which both Dr. Ainsley and President King have now put at issue. Proceed. Ms. King. I turned my head. It was the first time I had looked my sister directly in the eye since Christmas dinner 2 years ago. She was staring at me, her expression a toxic mix of panic and hatred. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. President King, I said, that email from Dr. Ainsley, the 20% goal regardless of that policy. Did you or did you not retain the clinical authority to order a variance if you believed your resident's safety was at risk? Silence. It was a binary trap. If she said yes, I had the authority, she would be admitting in front of the board that every single time she had denied a variance it was her own willful choice. She would be accepting the full weight of the negligence, freeing Ainsley and the HOA. If she said no, I did not have the authority, she would be accusing her boss and Harmony Hills HOA of forcing her to practice governance in violation of the law. She would be saving her position perhaps, but at the cost of her career. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing slightly. No sound came out. She was the star student who had been given a question she could not answer. She had been raised to be tough, to be a winner, to be the good daughter, and she had just been presented with a scenario where there was no way to win. Her silence was the loudest confession in the room. Let the record show, Mendez said into the void, that President King has declined to answer. The legal coordinator brought the focus back to the monitor. Let us return to the audit trails of the other complainants, she said one by one. The files appeared. Resident 229F. Resident reports 0.8 pain. New numbness in right leg. President King's note 2 hours later. PT first. Reevaluate 4 weeks. Clinical picture inconsistent. Resident 512G. Resident reports inability to bear weight. Pain 9/10. President King's note. Focus on PT. Poor resident effort. Symptom magnification. Resident 449B. Resident reports left leg collapse. President King's note. PT first. 3 times. 3 different residents. 3 reports of worsening mobility signs. 3 identical responses dismissing the pain, blaming the resident, and refusing to grant variance. This is not a guideline, Mendez said, his voice cold. This is a pattern of systemic dismissal. Dr. Ainsley, Vance interjected, his voice rising, trying to regain control. Dr. Ainsley sets policy from 30,000 feet. He does not manage individual resident charts. He cannot be held responsible for how President King chose to interpret or misinterpret that policy. He certainly has no involvement in the amending of notes. He would find that, as we all do, reprehensible. Ainsley nodded gravely. Absolutely. I would never under any circumstances condone the alteration of a resident record. That is a bright, clear line. I'm glad you agree, Mendez said. The legal coordinator changed the screen one last time. It was the audit log for resident Helix, the one that showed the administrator P. Jones amending the note and deleting the variance order per President King. Mr. Vance, Mendez said, you were correct. Dr. Ainsley did not amend this note. But if you look at the log 60 seconds, just 1 minute, after the administrator saved the fraudulent 4 out of 10 note, the coordinator highlighted a new line at the bottom of the log. Time 14 hours 31 minutes and 42 seconds. Action, note review KPI compliance. User, Q. Ainsley admin. Vance's face went slack. That's an administrative account. That could be anyone on his team. An administrative account, Mendez pressed. That is named for Dr. Quinn Ainsley. An account that 60 seconds after a fraudulent note was entered accessed that specific note for the sole purpose of, what does that say? KPI compliance. The coordinator read. Key performance indicator compliance. The wall did not just crack, it disintegrated. This was the system. This was the pressure cooker. Leah or her administrator would amend the note to make the resident's pain disappear. 1 minute later, Ainsley's administrative account would sweep in behind them, review the change, and tag it as compliant with the 20% reduction goal. Leah was not a rogue actor. She was the frontline soldier. Ainsley was the general standing behind her, watching her execute the orders and marking her down as a good, compliant soldier. This, Mendez said, is not a guideline. This is a conspiracy. This is active systemic fraud directed from the highest levels of the board to falsify HOA records for financial gain. In the back of the room, in the small crowded public gallery, a woman in a blue blazer stood up. I recognized her. She was the head of the state's largest resident advocacy group. When the coordinator said the word, overwrite for the 5th time, the woman let out a sound. It was not a word. It was a low, furious hiss that cut through the hot, dead air of the room. It was the sound of betrayal. Mendez looked at the HOA lawyer. Mr. Vance, your client Dr. Ainsley has been shown to be reviewing and approving fraudulent chart entries. Your other client, President King, has been shown to be ordering them. This is an active and ongoing threat to every resident in that neighborhood. Vance, seeing the entire case against Harmony Hills itself crystallized, tried one last desperate move. Mr. Chairman, this is an ambush. This is a complex IT matter. We have not had time to consult our own experts. This hearing has gone far beyond its intended scope. We request an immediate pause to confer with our clients. Mendez's gavel struck the oak table. The thud was so loud it made me jolt, sending a spike of fire up my spine. Denied, he said, his voice ringing with judicial fury. You have had 6 months, Mr. Vance, you have had 2 formal warnings from your own insurance carrier. This is not an IT matter. This is a public safety emergency. The data is speaking and this board is obligated to listen. The public we are mandated to protect deserves that. We will proceed. I looked away from Mendez, away from Ainsley, away from the glowing screen. I looked at Leia. The fight was gone. The arrogance, the confidence, the star president persona, it had all evaporated. She was not looking at me. She was not looking at Mendez. She was staring at Dr. Quinn Ainsley, the man who had been her mentor, the man she had followed, the man whose team she had tried to be on. And for the first time in my entire life, I did not see jealousy or rage or superiority in my sister's eyes. I saw fear, pure abject animal terror. She finally understood she was not the star. She was the shield. She was the one they were going to sacrifice to save the system. She was just the tool and she was the one who was about to be broken. The clock on the wall was the only thing moving. Thud. Thud. Dr. Ainsley stared at the monitor, his mask of composure gone, replaced by the waxy gray sheen of a man who had been cornered. Mr. Vance, the HOA lawyer, was shuffling papers, but his hands were shaking. He was not organizing. He was stalling. Dr. Mendez leaned forward, his voice dropping, all pretense of academic inquiry gone. Mr. Vance, Dr. Ainsley, you have categorized these amendments as clerical errors, as matters of clinical interpretation. You have blamed a guideline. Let us see what this systemic fraud looks like in aggregate. He nodded to Tara Rowe, the witness from OmniCloud Data. Ms. Rowe, please display the temporal hash chain for the resident helix file for the panel. The screen which had been showing the static audit log dissolved. It was replaced by a visualization. A long dark horizontal line like a horizon marked with timestamps. What you are seeing, Ms. Rowe explained, her voice crisp and technical, is the blockchain ledger of this file's life. Each node you see is a data block sealed with a unique cryptographic hash captured by our servers every 24 hours. Now, Mendez commanded, let us overlay the live file provided by Harmony Hills against the immutable backup from the same time index. The technician's fingers typed. A second line, bright blue, appeared just above the dark one. They ran parallel, identical. And now, the legal coordinator said, let us apply the user audit log. The technician hit enter. Suddenly the bright blue line erupted. A series of bright angry red markers appeared glowing like hot coals. They showed every single point where the live file, the one Vance had submitted, deviated from the immutable backup, the points where the truth had been altered. Those, Ms. Rowe said, are the delta events, the exact moments an administrator accessed the file and overwrote the data. The screen was a map of the fraud. October 10th, 1430. Note amend, a red flare. October 11th, 9:15. Note amend. Another red flare. October 13th, 11:52. Note amend. The third. They were not clerical errors. They were a coordinated sustained attack on the record. It is theatrical, Vance stammered, and prejudicial. It shows data points, Mr. Chairman, not intent. You are correct, Mr. Vance, Mendez said, his voice dangerously smooth. It lacks context. It lacks the human element. Ms. Coordinator, let us provide some. Call the next witness. The board calls Mr. Alan Kershaw, Internal Audit, Harmony Hills HOA. If Vance had been pale before, he was now translucent. This was the source. This was the whistleblower. This was the anonymous email. Ainsley looked at Kershaw with an expression of pure murderous betrayal. Kershaw was a small man in a rumpled suit. He looked terrified, but as he was sworn in, his voice was steady. Mr. Kershaw, Mendez began. In your capacity as an internal auditor, do you monitor non-president user activity for compliance? I do, Kershaw said. We conduct random routine screen capture audits on any user with high chart access. This includes administrators. Did you conduct such an audit on the account P. Jones? I did, as part of a routine review. Please play the capture from October 10th. Time index 1430. The screen changed again. It was now a video recording of a computer desktop, the charts, the data. This was the event itself. The room watched as the mouse controlled by the administrator opened the resident helix chart. We saw the original 9 out of 10 note. We saw the variance ordered entry. Then a small blue internal chat window popped up on the right side of the screen. The name on the chat was L. King President. The message, for all the world to see: hold the variance on helix. Score looks bad for the weekly metrics. Amend the note. PT first. A sound. A low horrified moan came from the public gallery. The video continued. We watched the administrator cursor move. We watched it click order delete. We watched it open the note. We watched it highlight the words 9 out of 10. And we watched the administrator type 4 out of 10. The video stopped. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the sound of a closing casket. This was not just a pattern. It was the order. It was the conspiracy captured in real time dictated by my sister. Mendez was not finished. We have seen the data. We have seen the order. Now let us see the consequence. He nodded to the coordinator. Enable the remote link for DR. Alani. A new face appeared on the large monitor. A sharp-eyed woman in blue hospital scrubs. DR. Alani, Mendez said, you are the Director of Rehabilitation Services at Harborview General. You received resident 512G after their discharge from Harmony Hills. What was their condition? Dr. Alani, speaking via video link, did not hesitate. The resident arrived with a chart note from President King stating, poor resident effort and symptom magnification. I was expecting a psychological case. Instead, I found a resident with acute left-sided weakness, radiating pain, and new onset saddle anesthesia. Saddle anesthesia, a catastrophic sign. Did you request imaging? Mendez asked. I did, Dr. Alani said, her voice tight with anger. My notes show I called President King's office twice requesting she order a stat MRI as is protocol. I was told by her administrator that President King had reviewed the case and the protocol was PT first. Imaging was denied. What did you do? I bypassed the protocol. I sent the resident to my own emergency department. The MRI showed a massive acute disc herniation that was compressing the spinal cord. We took them to surgery within 3 hours of their arrival at my clinic. So, Mendez clarified, the resident President King labeled as poor effort required emergency life-saving surgery. Yes, Dr. Alani said. And because of the 10-day delay, the nerve damage, it was and is permanent. The video link clicked off. The screen went dark. All eyes in the room, mine included, turned to Leah. She was not looking at Mendez. She was not looking at Ainsley. She was rocking slightly in her chair. She was shaking her head, her breath catching in her throat. I believed, she whispered. Her voice a raw, broken thing that the microphone amplified to the silent room. I believed they were weak. I believed they needed to be pushed. Dad he always said, you just have to be tough. She looked up, her eyes blind, searching. I believed if they just persisted, if they just tried, they would get stronger. I was just trying to make them tough. It was the King family diagnosis, the one that had poisoned us from the start. Dr. Eris, the ethics expert on the panel, leaned forward. President, you believed. You did not check. You did not scan. Leah just shook her head, the tears now streaming down her face, washing away the last of her composure. I could not stop myself. The pain in my back was a pillar of fire. But this was a different, older, deeper wound. I spoke. My voice was low and rough with pain and exhaustion, but it cut through her sobs. Belief is not evidence. Leia's head snapped up. She stared at me, her eyes wide with the shock of a person just pulled from a wreck. Belief is not evidence, I repeated, my voice gaining a cold, hard strength I did not know I possessed. The audit is evidence. The MRI is evidence. The numbness in a resident's foot is evidence. I leaned forward, the brace cutting into my skin. Your belief, that was just the excuse. Dr. Mendez looked at his panel. Dr. Eris nodded once. Mr. Bellows nodded once. Mendez lifted his gavel and struck the oak block. Thud. This panel moves to a preliminary finding, he announced, his voice ringing with judicial finality. Effective immediately, President Leia King's privileges to serve on any HOA board in this state are temporarily and summarily suspended. Leia let out a small strangled cry. A full hearing will be scheduled, Mendez continued. But pending that outcome, she will be required to undergo no less than 12 months of supervised retraining in advanced diagnostics, governance ethics, and chart management. He then turned his gaze, which was now granite, upon Ainsley and Vance. Furthermore, this panel finds sufficient and overwhelming evidence of systemic HOA fraud, administrative malfeasance, and a clear and present danger to the public. We will be referring this matter to the full board and immediately to the State Attorney General's office for an expanded criminal investigation into the key performance indicator policies, the actions of Dr. Quinn Ainsley, and the administration of Harmony Hills HOA. Ainsley stood up so fast his chair screeched on the floor. Vance grabbed his arm, pulling him back down, hissing furiously in his ear. In the public gallery there was a sudden shuffle. I looked over. The chairs where my parents had been sitting were empty. They had left sometime during the testimony. They had slipped out. They had not stayed for the verdict. They had not stayed for me. The adrenaline, the ice-cold legal fury that had held me upright, that had served as a second spine, it all dissolved. The full crushing weight of my 6 surgeries, of the last 3 days, of the last 3 decades, landed on me. The pain was no longer a fire. It was a black hole collapsing inward. My legs gave out. I did not fall, but I sank heavily back into my hard wooden chair. The movement forced a sharp, agonizing gasp from my lungs. I was exhausted. I was in agony. But as I sat there, the hot, stale air of the room washing over me, I realized something. I was smiling. It was a small, tired, painful smile, but it was a smile. The room was breaking apart. Lawyers were talking in hushed, urgent tones. The neighborhood journalist who had been live streaming on Saturday was running for the door. My phone buzzed in my lap. A news alert. The journal had already published. The headline, during sister's speech, resident files changed, HOA President Leia King suspended, association faces fraud probe. The exact words. The truth. Leia was still at the table alone. Vance and Ainsley were in a furious huddle by the door, already building their wall. She looked up. She saw me. She saw me smile. She stood, her legs unsteady, and walked toward me. Not as a president, not as a star. She was just a woman who had lost everything. She stopped 3 feet away. Her face was ravaged, her makeup gone, her eyes red and empty. I was wrong, she whispered. The words were so soft I barely heard them. I looked up at her from my chair. The pain was a constant screaming noise in my head. No, Leia, I said, my voice just as quiet. You were just the symptom. She frowned, her mind too broken to understand. The system was wrong, I clarified. The policy, the pressure, the KPIs, the idea that you can measure healing on a spreadsheet. That was wrong. I took a slow, painful breath, the brace fighting me. You were just the one who chose to stand with it. You chose to be tough. You chose to stand with the system instead of with your residents. I left Leia standing alone in the hot wood-paneled room, her face a mask of ruined certainty. I did not wait for Vance or Ainsley to regroup. I did not look for the press. I turned, every movement a negotiation with the hardware in my back, and walked toward the door. Maya was there. She had been waiting in the hall, her face tense. She did not ask if I had one. She just saw my face, saw the exhaustion, and moved to my side. "Okay," she said, her voice low, her arms supporting my elbow. "Let's get you home." The walk down the corridor was the longest of my life. My back was a single solid column of fire, the muscles spasming so hard I could feel the plastic of my brace groaning. "One straight spine at a time," Maya murmured, coaching me just like the parallel bars. "Breathe. Step. Breathe. Step." We passed the empty chairs in the hallway where my parents had been. They were really gone. They had not been able to stay and watch the final quiet execution. The truth had become too bright, too hot, and they had fled back to the shadows of their loyalty. I paused by those empty chairs, the ache in my back suddenly irrelevant, replaced by a cold hollow space. Maya stopped with me. She said nothing. I looked at the chairs, then at the elevator bank. "I don't need to be loud anymore, Maya," I whispered. I was so tired. "I don't think I ever need to raise my voice again." She nodded, understanding. "You don't. The records already spoke for you." The days that followed were a quiet avalanche of consequences. The board's preliminary finding, having been made in a partially public session, became binding. The recommendations were stark for President Leia King. An immediate mandatory suspension of her HOA position for 1 full year, not 12 months. 1 year before she could ever petition to serve again. She was required to complete and pass extensive retraining. The board specified the curriculum: advanced radiological interpretation, diagnostic bias, and resident-centered ethics and verified charting and records management. She would be, in effect, a resident again for Harmony Hills. The fallout was catastrophic. The Attorney General's office, armed with the hearing transcript and Kershaw's internal audit, opened a full-scale corporate fraud investigation. Dr. Quinn Ainsley was suspended indefinitely. His neighborhood service line now a crime scene. The association was forced to hire an independent external auditor to conduct a top-to-bottom review of all departmental KPIs and, most importantly, all administrative chart overriding protocols for the EVL provider. The company whose demo had been the accidental star of the show went into damage control. Within a week, they announced a new mandatory software patch for all HOA systems. A bright yellow warning banner would now permanently appear on any chart where the amend note function was used on a post-modification file, and a new non-negotiable setting was pushed to all clients. Any printed version of a resident record would now be required to include the full time-stamped audit history by default. The loophole was closed. My own life shifted. The board of HOA Oversight, my employer, formally invited me to lead a new statewide initiative. They asked me to take my experience, my legal knowledge, and my scars and use them. I was asked to draft the standard curriculum for all HOA training programs in the state on the very topic Leia had failed. The working title was When Pain is Not Psychological, a governance guide to overcoming diagnostic bias. I would use the anonymized cases, Resident Helix, Resident 512G, not as stories of revenge, but as immutable foundational case law. My pain and theirs would become the armor for thousands of future residents. The personal fallout was quieter but just as profound. My phone lit up 2 days after the hearing. A text from my mother. I had not heard from her since she had fled the auditorium. "Family is still family, Sloan. We love you both." I read the words. It was a plea for a truce, an attempt to smooth over the wreckage with the wallpaper of a word. Family. It was the same word she had used to demand my silence. It was the same word my father had used to demand my complicity. It was a word that meant nothing. I looked at the notification, felt the familiar dull pull of obligation, and then for the first time I just let it go. I did not reply. I left the message unread. A small gray dot of unresolved tension that was, I realized, no longer mine to resolve. I picked up my phone but opened my calendar. I made 2 appointments, one with Maya for physical therapy, one with my therapist for my own mental health. I was choosing to heal. Finally, on my own terms. A week later, a new text from Leia. Can we talk? Just 3 words. The old me would have felt a surge of pity or a spike of vindictive triumph. The woman sitting in the ergonomic chair, my spine finally beginning to heal, felt only clarity. The personal relationship was a burned-out building. I could not live there anymore. But the fire itself had illuminated a hazard. I agreed to meet her. My reply was specific. I will meet you at a coffee shop. We can discuss resident safety protocols. It was not about forgiveness. It was not about apologies. It was not about whose fault it was or who our parents loved more. That was all noise. It was about ensuring this never ever happened again. The boundary was no longer emotional. It was clinical. On the day I was scheduled to submit my final curriculum proposal to the board, I sat at my desk. My work was almost done. I had written the legal framework, the ethical guidelines, the case studies. I just needed to write the preamble. I found myself thinking back to that Saturday, to that vast cold auditorium. In my mind, I was standing in the back row again, the room empty, the stage dark except for the light of the massive LED screen. It was still frozen on that image from the demo, the one that had stopped the room, the one that had shown the mechanism of the lie. It was the audit trail, stark and clear. Action, order delete, variance accessibility. And next to it the user L. King President Admin. That was the moment. That was the real climax. The audience in that room, the 300 residents, had gasped when they saw it. They understood in that single shared second what I had known for years. The real weapon, the most dangerous thing in that entire HOA was not the rulebook. It was not the fines. It was the signature. It was the keystroke that came after the final signer. The one who had the power to look at a report of 9 out of 10 pain, of a numb foot, of a life collapsing and overwrite it. The signature that chose the system over the resident. The signature that dismissed the agonizing life-altering procedure as a minor surgery. That signature was the real knife. I looked at the blank document on my own screen. The preamble for the new state curriculum. I began to type. Preamble. All pain is real until proven otherwise. The baseline for resident care is not suspicion. It is belief. The HOA record is not a tool for compliance. It is the repository of a resident's truth. That truth is immutable. I finished the document. It was the single best piece of legal and governance writing I had ever produced. It was the recommendation that would build the new firewall. At the bottom of the page, I clicked the signature box. I typed my own name. Sloan King, Senior Counsel. I was the final signer. I hit submit. Thank you for listening to this story. Please comment below where you are listening from. Let's connect and share our thoughts. Please subscribe to HOA Revenge Stories. Like this video and support us by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.